Hi everyone, this is Noreen Chase, Community Manager of the Social Biz User Group, and today I am interviewing Sharon Bellamy James, our featured IBM Champion for the community. Sharon's going to share a little bit about her professional background, her role as an IBM Champion, and some tips about IBM Connections. Hi Sharon, how are you?
Hi, I'm very good, thank you very much.
So, give us your professional background, your CV, resume, about how you became involved in this space.
Okay, so I originally was interested in computers way back when I was in junior school, when I was about 8 or 9, I think. One of our teachers had a ZX81, which was like the first ever home computer. And we used it to program up some traffic lights on a model in the classroom. So that was when I first got the computing bug. But I first started off on the career path that I'm on now in the late 90s. In about 1997, one of my friends was storing his PC at my house, and I was using it to play games and, browse the early parts of the internet with. And every time something went wrong, I got fed up of phoning him up and asking him what was the problem and how to fix it. So in the end, I just asked him nicely if he would teach me how to fix the machine. So that started me off on a career as a PC engineer. My first real IT job, I started in 1999, and I learned about the AS400 as was, which is the iSeries IBM I platform now. And was my first dipping my toe in the water of any kind of IBM and Lotus software. I became a very bad Notes Domino administrator for version 4, and that's probably where my knowledge of Domino stops. I know enough to be dangerous, but that kind of got me really into this is quite cool. I like collaborating. Kind of space, and it was my first real taste of using some proper hardware in an AS400. I kind of did that for a few years, and then worked at another couple of companies being their sort of internal systems admin. And then in about 2003 I had my first exposure to WebSphere, which has been the software that's kind of been my mainstay for the last, since then basically. I worked for an e-business company because sort of commerce and selling stuff online was like the big thing back in the early 2000s. So my main exposure then was looking after WebSphere boxes, because that was the platform to have your web-based applications on. And I was very lucky that the guy that I worked for was probably the expert in that field in the UK at the time. So he was my mentor for 6 years, teaching me everything I needed to know about the iSeries and WebSphere and commerce and looking after web-based platforms. We also had a team of about 10 developers, which were fun to manage. They were like wrangling cats. Make sure that all their systems were the right level and they weren't trying to deploy anything dodgy to any of the machines. So that was probably the most fun job I've ever had, I think. It was hard, but it was also, I learned so much in those 6 years. It was absolutely fantastic. After 6 years there, I went and did something completely different and went to work at a university for a couple of years. And that was my first exposure to Connections. That I think version 2 had just come out at that point. And the systems guy there said, we've got this new piece of software called Lotus Connections. It came free with something that we've bought. Do you want to give it a try? So basically I had very little instruction. I went and spoke to a couple of people that I know had installed it before, and that's pretty much been what I've been doing since 2009. I worked for a couple of business partners for a couple of years, and then in 2013 I formed my own consulting company, CubeSoft, which is what I do now, and I also do a lot of work for Rock Team, the BP based in the US. I do a lot of work for them. So my primary focus is now IBM Connections, WebSphere, and anything associated with it, and I love every single minute of it.
That's fascinating journey that you've taken. Along that way, you've become an IBM champion. Tell us what that is like.
It's actually very cool. I was very lucky. I've been a champion since the program started in 2011 for our software space, and I've had it from being a customer and a business partner, which is slightly different, but also it's also the same, if that makes sense. Basically, being an IBM champion means that you evangelize and you kind of spread the word of how awesome the software is that you look after or that you believe in. And since the ICS brand, or ESS as it now is, merged in with some of the WebSphere things, it means that I'm allowed to be a part of what used to be the yellow bubble. So the benefits of being an IBM champion are quite cool, because we already evangelize and spread the word on how awesome is the software that we do. But it also means that you get exposure to all the other champions that may necessarily have skills that you don't, because I'm a WebSphere person. There's lots of Domino champions and programming champions. So if I need assistance with anything that's Domino related or programming related, I know that I can ask one of them, and the chances are they will either know the answer to my question, or they'll know somebody that does, or they can put me in touch with somebody that can help me. So that is a massive bonus. We also get to share our knowledge, which is great. We have Skype chats, and we get to meet up at all the IBM events, which is fantastic. It's just another awesome thing that you get to speak at things like Connect and all the user groups. I've been lucky enough to talk at user groups in the US, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in the UK, and I've got to meet a lot of people that I would not normally have met if I wasn't a champion, and I've also made a lot of new friends out of it, which is also great. We get access to some fantastic things like IBMers that you wouldn't normally get access to, which are always great. So if you've got an issue or a problem, or you need to bounce some ideas off somebody, Amanda and her fantastic team try to hook us up with the right people. And we also get a sneak peek of what's coming at Connect, because we get invited to the Leadership Alliance conference, which is also very good if you can make it to Boston. There's also some cool stuff that they give you, some cool gear for being an IBM champion, which is a bonus because nobody obviously goes for it to get the gear. But in the past, we've had cool stuff like iPad cases and things like that. But you get some quite cool gear for being an IBM champion, so that's always a bonus. And I've also got work from being an IBM champion, because you get all this extra exposure for being somebody that's good at what you do. It means that people know about you. So one of the unexpected bonuses is I've actually got work out of being an IBM champion. So thanks, IBM. But I do love it. It's got you get to meet all sorts of awesome people. You're doing what you love. Anyway, so I would be doing if I wasn't an IBM champion, I'd still be evangelizing about how awesome I think software is and helping out people with WebSphere wherever I can. So it's just a bonus. It's just a bonus that I am labeled as an IBM champion while I'm doing it.
That sounds great. And you mentioned earlier that you mostly work with IBM Connections, and I know that you've presented at user groups, like you said, on IBM Connections. Can you give us 5 tips on installing IBM Connections that the community can take home with them?
I recently did a presentation at Icon UK about the best and worst things about installing Connections. Basically, there is no right way, but there's plenty of wrong ways. And over the 6 or 7 years that I've been using Connections, I've found some really good examples of when things don't go quite the way that you wanted them to. So I'm more than happy to share those with you. The first one is a total overkill scenario where a good friend and colleague of mine was installing Connections for the first time on an iSeries machine. IBM have written him a lovely guide on how to install it on an iSeries machine. And now an iSeries box is obviously, it's a big machine that's used to handling thousands and thousands of transactions. People use it for their ERP systems, and it's very WebSphere on because it can handle the amount of traffic it gets, no problem at all. So in the instructions on how to install it, it was assumed that you want to do what's called a large deployment, where you install one piece of one WebSphere server for each of the Connections applications, of which there are 14. So off he went, followed his guide, installed a massive, great big system, which is probably capable of handling about 10,000, maybe even 20, 30,000 users. The only problem is he only had 800 users on his system. So he'd installed this massive, great big server. It's not wrong, but just complete overkill for what he wanted, just because he followed the guide because somebody assumed that that would be the best way for him to do it. So not necessarily a wrong thing, but it's probably best to work out, what kind of size of system you're building for before you go ahead and just follow the guide for the guy that says, just make a large one, because it's not always necessarily the best way to do it. Another good one I've seen recently is upgrading a system from Connections 4 to Connections 4.5. Everything went beautifully. A week or so in to our going live, we started hitting some performance issues, which was a bit strange because everything had been working perfectly up until then. There was a lot of out-of-memory errors, so it looked as though the system wasn't man enough to handle the amount of users that we'd got loaded on it. So we retuned it. It would work again for another couple of weeks, and then we'd hit exactly the same problem. None of us on the admin team had any idea what was going on. So we opened a PMR with IBM, sent in all the logs and the tracing. Again, they had absolutely no idea that was what was going on. They were saying it's a performance issue. Why, what's occurring? After a couple of weeks and lots of going backwards and forwards and restarting the system on a regular basis, someone internally twigged that they were actually adding more users to the system every 2 weeks, and nobody have thought about communicating it to any of the other departments. So we were tuning the system for the amount of users that were on it, and they were adding more and not telling us. So once we'd found out from the team how many people they were likely to add over the next 6 months, and then made the system man enough to cope with that, it has been, touch wood, as good as gold and has not had any problems. So the moral of the story there was, please communicate internally, because otherwise terrible things may happen. We're in a situation where we're upgrading them from 4.5 to 5, and already the first question that has been asked is, how many users are you expecting to add once we migrate, please, so we can make sure that it works so we don't have the same thing again. Another gem I have found recently is I was asked to take over an install from another admin that had been installing Connections as a proof of concept. So the customer decided they were going to scrap that proof of concept and just go straight for building a system for their users to start using straight away. So running through the system that they'd already configured, I was checking some of the configuration files and some of the properties files just to see how they'd set it up. And I'd noticed that they'd taken off all the protect fields from the passwords. So all the passwords were sat in all the properties files in plain text. Because scripts and files for the first time, if they've got the protect field in, it will encrypt the password so it's not in plain text. So if you go and look at it again, obviously you can't see the password. But all of those had been removed, so every single password for the system was available in a text file for me to look at. And then when also working through the system, I discovered that they'd set all of the passwords to be the standard IBM training password, so it wasn't particularly secure. So probably the top tip there would be, don't remove your protect feature where it can encrypt the passwords, and don't use a default one, because basically anybody could get in and play with your system otherwise. The fourth one is, don't try and do everything at once. I've been assisting on a project where the customers were upgrading from Connections 4 to Connections 5. And on Connections 5, they were adding all the cool good stuff that you get: IBM Docs, Connections Content Manager, the Cognos for metrics, the Edit Live text editing, and also the surveys and forms. We suggested that we tackled it in stages, so migrate the system first and then add each of the other features as a small sub-project. But the project managers decided that it should be all or nothing. So no time was taken really to work out what we should do as far as deploying it sensibly. And the problem was, once everything had been put together and the data had been migrated over, we hit multiple problems, and we didn't know which one of the newer features was causing the problem because they'd all been installed at the same time. So rather than installing one bit, make sure it works, install the next bit, make sure it works, it was just kind of all thrown together. And the time taken to work out what all the issues were and fix them individually would have been a lot less if we'd had deployed it in small stages. So my advice there would be to use the KISS method, the keep it simple, stupid method, and do one piece at a time, because I've been stung on more than one occasion when a project manager, bless them, I thought it would be an awesome idea just to bung everything on at once. So when you can, install one piece at a time and make sure it works before you move on to the next bit. My fifth and last one is another awesome example of overkill, where the admin had basically needed to install a highly available system. So because it was a hospital, so they always needed their connection server up. So he installed this beautifully configured, highly available system on Linux that could handle up to 10,000 users. He'd followed a guide, a Zero to Hero guide, which are awesome if you're trying things out for the first time. He'd set it all up, configured it all, and it worked fantastically, except for he had 30 users on his system, and he only needed a connection system that would be able to cope for 120 users. So not wrong that he'd configured it up that way, but he'd made it very, very complex, and he was struggling to get a grip of which piece lived where. Because also the other thing was he only needed the files and profiles entitlement that came with Notes and Domino. So he'd installed this massive, great big system that could cope with thousands and thousands of users, and he only needed it for 120 users, bless him. So again, not wrong, but beautifully configured, just complete overkill for what he wanted. And again, he should have kept it a little bit more simpler. My biggest tip probably would be to understand what you're trying to achieve before you even think about installing it, because otherwise you could end up with this massive, great big beast of a system, which you'll struggle to manage when you really don't need that much, because Connections is a lovely piece of equipment once it's installed and running.
That it is. Yes. So those are 5 great tips, Sharon. Thank you for telling us about them. And I will include in the blog a link to your Icon UK presentation that everyone can refer to and get more information about what you've learned. Great tips. Thank you. So now we're at the end of our interview, and it's time for our geek question. And I know you are a huge Star Wars fan, so I wanted to ask you, what are your impressions? What is your impression about the upcoming movie?
I'm actually quite excited about it, to be honest. I have tried to avoid all the spoilers and things. I've seen the 2 trailers that have been released, and that's it. I've avoided any. I've just basically been avoiding everything on the internet that's involved in anything to do with the Star Wars movie, because I want to go and sit in the theatre, as I did when I was 7, when it came out originally, and watch it with a completely open mind, you know. So I have high hopes that it's going to be awesome, and not like episode 1, which was rubbish. but it has, because it's got a lot of the original cast from the first or the middle three films. And J.J. Abrams is a good director, and he's made some awesome sci-fi movies. So I have high hopes that he's not going to disappoint the army of Star Wars fans everywhere. If not, he's going to be in some serious trouble.
Exactly, because he's exposed on social media now.
Yep.
And people can tell him exactly what they think.
Exactly. Yes.
I'm looking forward to it also myself. So I have high hopes also.
Well, because I'm a member of a couple of costuming clubs, on the opening night, I'm not actually going to see it when it comes out because we're going to be there in Star Wars costumes promoting the movie outside the theatre. So for probably the first 2 nights that it's on, I'll be in my Mandalorian armour promoting the movie and not actually seeing it. So hopefully I'll get to see it on opening weekend at some point. But it should be fun.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the end of our interview. Sharon, thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
And everyone, this will be posted on Social Biz User Group. Thank you for joining us. Make it a great day.